Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. You remember the last episode, right? Which was the power of reacting and not writing. And a whole week has passed since that episode, so we need to elaborate on that one point. So we covered the power of reacting or not writing, but now we'll cover the second and third point. So what are they? Why reaction has an expertise spin-off, and the third is how to keep reaction-based articles going, even when they seem too small or too big. Let's start out with why reaction has an expertise spin-off. Before 1960, Coca-Cola had a big problem with the red color of their cans. Every printer had their version of red. Sometimes Coca-Cola would end up with a darkish red, and sometimes it would be much too light. This discrepancy arose because Coke cans were printed worldwide, and every printer thought that their version of red was a close enough match. The problem seemed unsolvable. Coke's network was too vast and involved too many suppliers. Yet one of the printers solved this seemingly impossible problem. There was a printing firm in New Jersey, and they had hired a new employee, and this guy's name was Herbert Lawrence. Lawrence didn't understand why there should be such a vast amount of randomness in printing. What he did was he called upon his chemical expertise and he came up with the idea of shades of red. Now, if you're in printing, you know that everything is comprised of CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. The K is for black, by the way. And a mixture of those creates different colors. And what he did was he created a numbering system where a shade of red would have so much of yellow and so much of magenta, and maybe a little black, which is what gives it its darkness. And so he created an identification system. And you've heard of that identification system. It's called the Pantone matching system. So instead of just the color red, there would be shades of red. And every shade of red had these mix of tones. And now you had a sort of ID. And it was so cool. Because of the colors ID, the Pantone shade would always be the same no matter where the can was printed in the world. And all of this happened because he refused to accept the status quo. He didn't merely do what the others in the field were doing, and that's what set him out as the expert. And this is approximately what happens when you write an article. When you read something or you listen to something or watch something, your reaction tends to be quite different from everybody else. It creates a tangent, and it creates a tangent that no one is expecting. And in doing so, you get clients who read your work for the first time and they go, oh, this person thinks differently. And that's because you're not creating your work from the ground up. You're not saying, okay, I'm going to write about the want factor. Oh, I'm going to write about topic number 1, or I'm going to write about topic number 2. Instead, what you're doing is you're reacting, and that sets you off on a tangent. And people start to take notice. Compare this with what exists on the internet today, and largely off the internet as well, is that there is a considerable amount of sameness. Sameness, as you'd expect, is perfect for business. So I'm not saying it's bad for business. If someone writes an article about how to bake a cake, there's always room for about 1 million other articles that are identical in almost every respect. It's not like you and I won't read another article on how to bake a cake and a third article on how to bake a cake. We will. Which is to say that sameness is a good recipe for success. However, while it's all very useful, that kind of sameness does not evoke the emotion that you need to stand out. Let's take an example. Let's say you wanted to write an article about photography and you wanted to write about, is it okay to use automatic settings instead of shooting in manual? Now, this is a pretty straightforward question. You might sit at a cafe and say, what I'm going to write today, and then you might say, okay, is it okay to shoot in manual, or should we shoot in automatic, or should we shoot in automatic? You could have come up with this question yourself. However, when somebody else comes up with it, your thought process is slightly different. Even if you're pretty much a beginner, you're likely to have an opinion on when to shoot in manual and why even some National Geographic-based photographers use automatic settings. And as soon as you express that opinion, there is this emotion that creeps in. Sometimes it just comes crashing in. And this is because you're not writing for yourself, but you're writing for somebody else. You're responding to a post, you're responding to an email, you're responding to something. And that kind of instigates the emotion in a way that we cannot control. It's at that point in time that you should just write. Just put it out there, because you're not writing an article, you're not editing, you're not thinking of the future, you're just answering the question. And since you're on a roll, put in as much detail as possible. Because when you write a fair bit, you're doing three things simultaneously. In that group, if it's a group for instance, you're seen as someone who knows their stuff. Even though you might not feel like that, they don't know that. So you're seen as someone who knows their stuff, and that creates a level of expertise. The second thing is that even if you don't feel like an expert, you can't ignore it when you write an article and then people respond and they thank you for your expertise. So essentially what's happening is you're starting to erode that imposter syndrome that a lot of us feel. People always respond, they ask for help, and then you realize, wait, I know a lot more than I thought I knew. And the third thing is that it creates content based on their questions. Plus, they may have counter questions. And notice something, you haven't written an article. You're just answering the questions. You're just responding to stuff. And in doing so, you're creating a very comprehensive article. This is when another fear comes in. Shouldn't you be doing a lot of research before you share your knowledge? Wouldn't you appear foolish in front of all of those people? The point is that they are strangers. Yes, it's okay to feel fearful of them, even if they are strangers, but remember that we are always undercutting our level of expertise. Even as beginners, we know things that others may have overlooked. And this is sometimes if you're a beginner. When you're looking at stuff and you're answering stuff, you're looking at it through the eyes of the beginner, and you start to see things completely differently from the expert who knows it all and doesn't see the view of the beginner. So even if you're a beginner, you have a very valuable opinion that you can put together. There will be this overpowering need for research. You will reach out and go, oh, wait a second, let me find out if this is entirely true. But write from your own personal experience. Write from the things that you already know, and you will find that you don't need the research after all. And you'll be amazed at how well people respond. If you're part of a group, you have to pick their group wisely. Some people have no sense of decorum. They're rude, they're obnoxious. They live to put each other down. If you run into such a situation, be aware that this is not the only group, this is not the only situation, this is not the only experience you're going to have. That there are thousands of other groups that would not only be civil, but would benefit from your knowledge. Herbert Lawrence invented the Pantone system. He wasn't an expert. He was a part-time hire. He was a recent graduate when he joined the printing company. All he did was show some initiative. All he did was put in some detail in 24 shades of red, and that got him to a position to become the expert. When writing articles, you may not feel, you may not think, or even be an expert. However, no one knows and no one cares. What they care about is that you've given your advice, you've gone into some detail, and you've told them why you feel that way. And they can feel that emotion just like you can right now when you're listening to this podcast. This is coming not from some massive research, not some study that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's coming from my own experience. And you can feel that emotion. You can hear it in my voice. So without realizing it, you become the expert in the eyes of others. And this brings us to the end of this section. With the first podcast, we looked at how you need to react, not necessarily write from the ground up. In the second part, we looked at how reaction has an expertise spin-off. And now, in the third part, we'll look at how to keep the reaction-based articles going, even when you think, oh wait, this is too small. This is such a little, tiny, itty-bitty amount of information. Or sometimes you write so much that it's too big. How do you keep that going? Let's find out. When I wrote my first marketing article back in 2001 or so, I wasn't reacting. The process was tedious and it took days to get the article off the ground. There were also other problems. I didn't understand the structure of an article. I didn't put in enough examples. I failed to see the potential objections in every single article. And almost 20 years later, there seems to be even more to write and more angles to tackle. All of this content comes virtually exclusively from a reaction. Even so, how does this reaction play a part in your content marketing strategy? The main factor to understand when creating content is that clients want a few core elements. The first point is, if possible, they want you to give your point of view. The second is, they don't need the content to be of the same length every time. So let's talk about both of those points. The first is to give your point of view. Now, this is something that we've already established in this series, that your reaction matters. However, when you're looking at a long-term content strategy, it's easy to believe that you need to stick to a length of time. So if you've been writing articles of 1,000 words each, then you go, okay, the last one was 1,000 and the next one needs to be 1,000, and you keep going that way. But it doesn't have to be that way. That belief system is erroneous. Some of the best loved articles on psychotactics have been super short, and some are so long that we call them long reads. On average, a psychotactics article is somewhere in the middle, between 1,000 to 1,500 words in length. The reality is that every article can't be super detailed. Sometimes you want to write a really short article. You want to get a single point across. You can still explain that singular point, and it doesn't have to cross 1,000 or 1,500 words. At other times, a page might not be enough, and you might need to stretch that article to 3,000 or 4,000 words if that's what you can do. And this is where we tend to freeze. We believe that we have to stick to a formula, and that formula has been set in stone. Yet that formula is only in our heads, because if you ask a client how long or short your articles happen to be, they will come up with all sorts of different answers. So the goal of your content marketing strategy is just to be consistent. When we started out in 2001, we put out the newsletter once a month, then twice a month, and today it goes out twice a week, without fail. Is the article too short? Is it too long? Is it just right? That kind of introspection throws us off track. And it throws me off track as well. I'll create a podcast like, the previous podcast was just 10 minutes. Did you notice? You didn't notice. But I'll go to Renuka and in a morose mood, I'll say, I just managed to get 10 minutes of a podcast out. And she'll go, oh, wow, that's cool. And that's not what I'm expecting. I'm expecting her to say, wasn't it supposed to be 30 minutes? And we're always looking at this benchmark that things have to be consistent all the time. And the only thing that needs to be consistent is that you're putting out that content on a regular basis and that there is emotion, and that emotion comes from the reaction that you have. And at times you can sit down and write an article from scratch, and that's fine. But by and large, if you're putting out articles on a consistent basis, which is what you want to do and have to do, well, then you've got to have a reaction-based strategy rather than a creation-based strategy. And I hope that was helpful. I know that was helpful, and the reason is because I wrote this for someone and they changed their strategy accordingly. So that's really what it's all about. React, don't write. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. On the 22nd of March, we have the Uniqueness course. This is the home study of the Uniqueness course. All of us know that we need uniqueness for our products and services, simply because we know what is unique about it, but the client doesn't always perceive it to be unique. And we can't just go around saying, oh, we're better in service or better in quality, because it means nothing to anybody else. So we have to come up with a precise uniqueness. Jeff Pringle, who's a member of 5000 BC, he has a uniqueness, and he's an accountant, and he says, we're not Santa Claus accountants. Now, pay attention to that, because that got your curiosity. We're not Santa Claus accountants. And the client goes, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, your accountant shows up once a year, and we don't. We check on you several times a year, and that's what makes us unique. Now, two things there. The first is that you're going to remember that for the rest of your life. And secondly, it is very difficult to copy, because if someone else says the same thing, you go, wait, that's Jeff's line. So how do you create this uniqueness? Well, Jeff has been singing the praises of the Uniqueness course ever since he did it and came up with this Santa Claus line. And when you have a uniqueness like this, you have more confidence. It's easier to be more enthusiastic about your product or your service. So check out that Uniqueness course. It's on the 22nd of March. Wait a second. It's not the 22nd of March. It says the 20th of March. I really should wear my glasses when I'm reading this stuff. So that's the 20th of March, 2021, the Uniqueness course. And sign up for the goodies. Go to psychotactics.com/ugoodies. That's psychotactics.com/u, just the letter U, goodies. And you'll get a whole bunch of goodies. I'll say bye for now, and we'll see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye. Still listening? One of the strategies that I used almost inadvertently was when I started out in 2001, I'd go out to several forums. And one of those forums, people would ask a lot of questions about marketing. And I was a beginner back then. I knew some stuff because I was reading a lot of books. And they would come back and ask me some more questions or some clarification or have some objections. And as a result of that, I was able to piece together an article. I would then bring that article back, tidy it up, move it around, and that's how we wrote some of our earliest articles. Well, that's not entirely true. I started out writing for marketingprofs.com, and most of those articles were from the ground up, and that would take me days to write. The ones that were very quick and very, not easy, but relatively easier, were the ones where I just answered the question. So it was all a factor of reaction. And as I mentioned, this podcast is also a reaction, as will the next one and the next one. And that's kind of the strategy that we use. And more so because of the emotion, more so because I feel like I'm speaking to somebody and not writing in this vast emptiness. So try it yourself, and you'll be surprised at how you can gain that expertise, gain that proficiency, but mostly not feel the frustration of writing like an author. Bye-bye finally, and see you in 5000 BC.